The autumn wind is a raider.
The autumn wind just may be a raider. The thing is, though, without navigation, you'll just be blown horribly off course. If Polaris, the North Star for every single NFL franchise out there, is winning the Super Bowl, the Raiders find themselves marooned in uncharted waters. A team that prides itself on history and tradition has tossed it all overboard. The current captain is a modern-day Gilligan. Interlopers have infiltrated the crew. The end result: losses, dysfunction, embarrassment. No one is harnessing the wind to drive the team towards its goals.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun.
You can only pillage and plunder if you end up in a place that has people to pillage and plunder to be plundered. In the NFL, that is the hunk of silverware so eye-catching that it would make your favorite Spanish monarch blush. Unfortunately for Raiders fans, wherever in the world you may be, those days are long gone, consigned to history. A franchise that once took pride in robbing the league of its biggest prize and laughing in the process has become nothing more than the football equivalent of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland. A commitment to excellence, a will to win, just win, baby. The greatness of the Raiders, nothing but empty, hollow words from a man who refused to change, and his son, a man too afraid to be his own man. This is how the Raiders lost their way.
Okay, well, you tell me when you're ready.
I really believe that the greatness of the Raiders would be in its future.
We're still the Oakland Raiders, and we are the Raiders, and we represent the Raider Nation.
Just win, baby.
Steps up, delivers one to Sweeney, interception, Hayes, touchdown Raiders!
The prime thing is you have to win.
Deep to the end zone to Branch. It is caught by Branch. Touchdown Raiders!
The perpetuation of the greatness of the Raiders to take a professional football team and give it a distinct characteristic that's different from all others.
Even the bad guys that nobody else wanted end up going to the Raiders and becoming great ball players.
That the one thing I know is what I don't know, and I'm going to surround myself with the people that do know those things.
That all sounds good to everybody, but I always went the other way. We're going to take what we want. Because I think this thing is cycled.
My father used to say that the greatness of the Raiders is in its future.
I think it's safe to say that this will be talked about quite a bit.
Most people see the Oakland Raiders as stereotypical pirates, the types you'd see on TV and in movies. I, though, however, like to think of the franchise more as a pirate in the vein of Sir Francis Drake, a privateer who was the first Brit to circumnavigate the world and who, quote-unquote, discovered California. I mean, he discovered it for the British crown. More fitting, he spent a huge part of his sailing career pillaging and plundering the Spanish to such an extent they nicknamed him the Dragon. His exploits were legendary, although if we're being honest, he was kind of a horrible person, as most pirates tend to be. His death by dysentery, sort of a fitting demise. As for the Raiders' downfall, well, it hasn't been quite as painful as Drake's bout of dysentery, but it's not been easy to endure. A lot of people will point to Super Bowl 37 as the beginning of the end. Barrett Robbins' infamous night in Mexico and subsequent drama surrounding his whereabouts is low-hanging fruit. Yet the Raiders did not lose that game by 27 points because backup center Adam True was playing. The first Rich Gannon interception was a real backbreaker. With the score tied at 3 and the ball inside Bucs territory, the third down pick swung momentum Tampa Bay's way, and they never relinquished it. Things have never been the same, or so it seems. Another moment cited by some Raiders fans out there as the cause of the demise of the Raiders is the franchise's relocation from Oakland to Las Vegas. There is an interesting thing to note about this. ESPN recently surveyed players on the toughest places in the NFL to play. Las Vegas and Allegiant Stadium received 0 votes. 22 venues were mentioned in this survey, but not the current home of the Raiders. You know which stadium was mentioned, though? The Oakland Coliseum. That's right. A stadium the NFL hasn't played in since 2019, a place that probably more than half of the players currently in the NFL have never suited up in, was still considered to be among the toughest places to play in professional football. All that said, I'm not sure if Las Vegas and Allegiant Stadium is really the problem with the Raiders. I mean, let's not forget this.
I'm a Raider from the Bay to LA to Las Vegas.
That song, for the record, released in 2002. Damn, you know, I guess Loonies knew all along. I also reckon that makes this true. Since we're here, hey Loonies, you got any more words of wisdom for us?
You fuck 20 more niggas, come to me saying you got the itch.
That is unsettling. Where are you going with this?
But I ain't got it, punk. I use the Jimmy.
So wait, the implication here is, I don't know what the hell that was, but I think it is a prime example as to why the Bay Area rap scene never blew up. That unpleasant, confusing musical experience aside, while the Loonies may have predicted or foretold the Raiders leaving Oakland for Las Vegas, and that Super Bowl loss to the Buccaneers was bad, these are the easy narratives. The thing is, the fall of the Raiders began years before either of those moments. The late 1980s is where things truly begin to change for the silver in black. At the start of the 80s, Al Davis, in his endless pursuit of more and more luxury boxes, opted to relocate the Raiders from Oakland to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. He was promised a lot of those shiny suites, but when those plans never came to fruition, Davis started to look elsewhere for new digs once more. The problem here is that anyone with the means to get a new stadium built wanted nothing to do with this unreliable grifter. And those willing to partner with Davis were dreamers who had no chance of getting anything done. Looking your way, Sacramento, California, and that forever unfinished multi-purpose stadium. Eventually, Davis ends up back in Oakland with the Raiders at the Coliseum, but by this time, football has passed him by, and those capable of stewarding the franchise to success had deserted him. Those stadium shenanigans took up a great deal of Davis's time and energy during the late 80s and early 90s. That, of course, was a massive problem considering Davis was also the team's general manager and dabbled a bit in defensive coaching. With the team transitioning from glory years to its next era, Davis was distracted by stadium concerns. Making matters worse, there was never any delegating with him. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, and everyone else was to be damned. This was fine when he was 100% committed to football operations. It was not ideal though when he had other things on his plate that he needed to get done. Tom Flores steps down as head coach after the 1987 season. He moved to a front office role, although that was something he would not hold on to for long. In the front office, Ron Wolf grew up with the Raiders. He started as a scout with the franchise all the way back in 1963. He was someone with Davis in the AFL foxhole all those years ago, and apart from a brief stint with the expansion Tampa Bay Buccaneers during the 1970s, Wolf spent a great deal of his professional career making sure Mr. Magoo didn't drive the franchise off the cliff due to his nearsightedness. He, though, left after the 1989 season. Both Flores and Wolf understood the one simple, enduring reality as it related to the Raiders. 1 Corinthians 10:31 states, "So rather you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God." Davis 4:20 states, "Whether you are a coach or front office staff, whatever you do, all credit goes to Al." Finally, that religious studies minor paying off. Seriously though, the thing about Wolf and Flores and a few others in the Raiders offices around this time is that they didn't care about the adulation. They were the embodiment of just win, baby. They were more than happy to let Al Davis have all of the credit, all of the spotlight. They knew how to operate under his wants and desires while still building a competitive football team. When they leave, no one steps up to fill this void. Instead, you get a bunch of enablers and glad-handers. Decisions become far more erratic. The team drafts Todd Marinovich and starts a trend of firing head coaches and promoting a random offensive assistant to replace them. My personal favorite moment during this time period comes during the 1993 NFL draft. The Raiders held the 41st pick in the second round, but they opted to trade down to pick number 56, still in the second round. The draft continues. Eventually, pick number 56 comes up. They're on the clock, and who did they select? Well, this is who they chose.
Pass.
Patriots swoop in, make a selection, Raiders back on the clock. So, who did they take this time around?
Pass.
That's correct. The Raiders missed their pick not once, but twice. Eventually, when they did hand in a name to the commissioner, the draft had ticked over to the third round.
I'll take the kid.
They grabbed Billy Joe Hobart, a quarterback who had been kicked out of college for accepting a bunch of loans that weren't really loans and then spending the money on cars, guns, stereos, and parties.
I'm very flattered. I was his second choice after pass.
The dude single-handedly tanked the Washington Huskies football program, yet no one in those Raider offices could talk Al Davis out of taking him. Oh yeah, the Raiders still had one problem child quarterback on the roster in Marinovich and had just signed Jeff Hostetler as a free agent. Basically, the Raiders were so busy bickering about taking a quarterback they not only didn't need, but one who would have most likely still been on the draft board when it was their turn to pick again, that they missed their selection twice. Just scenes, man. Pure scenes. Things slowly begin to change after Bruce Allen is hired for a front office role in 1995. The team starts drafting better and roster construction is a little more coherent. Then, after head coach Joe Bugle is fired upon the conclusion of the 1997 season, Allen manages to convince Davis to hire John Gruden as coach. This moment is both the end of the beginning and beginning of the end. Allen and Gruden turned the franchise's fortunes around. Now, they didn't manage to win a Super Bowl, but that was because they would go up against one of the best defenses in NFL history and a stupid rule that would eventually be changed. While the team was winning, things were not going so swell behind the scenes. Davis was no fan of Gruden's West Coast offense, so much so that oftentimes he would call down from the owner's box to the field to tell Gruden he needed to put in James Jett. Jett, by the way, at this time was in his early 30s, washed, and only ran go routes. Also, Davis wanted credit for the team's successes. Gruden also liked getting the credit. He liked being out in front of the media. Tom Flores was always happy being an NPC in Davis's grand game. Chucky, not so much. It has been reported that Davis did not think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers ownership would actually meet his admittedly steep asking price for Gruden's services. This is probably true. Then again, Davis could have easily reneged on that deal, just like he reneged on countless other deals during his lifetime. No one forced him to accept it. Importantly though, moving on from Gruden gave Davis the chance to reclaim all of the credit. Not that there would be much to claim moving forward. Bill Callahan comes in, takes the team to the Super Bowl, takes the team to the toilet bowl, and is shown the door. As that is happening, Bruce Allen is recruited to Tampa Bay by Gruden. This means Al Davis is left alone to his own devices, something that is never a good thing. The Raiders between 2004 and Al Davis's passing can best be summed up by one name: Rob Ryan. Between 04 and 08, the Raiders would have 4 different head coaches and 1 defensive coordinator, that being Ryan. You're probably thinking to yourself, that is a bit odd, and you would be right. So here's what happened. Turns out Al Davis was really coaching the defense and Rob Ryan was his puppet. Ryan has tried to make it seem like their relationship was more nuanced than that, but it wasn't. Like, everyone knew Davis was really the coach of the defense, something that multiple coaches of the Raiders have gone on to confirm. Oh yeah, Ryan was also there to stooge on the head coach. I mean, really, if we're being honest, Rob Ryan was really the NFL coaching equivalent to Randall from Recess. This all came to head after Lane Kiffin's first season leading the Raiders. The now old Miss Boss wanted to fire Ryan, citing the fact the Raiders' defenses under him were not all that great. Davis refused. The two had a legendary falling out of absolute epic proportions. Davis demanded Kiffin's resignation, and Kiffin told Davis he wasn't leaving without a full severance package. A few weeks into Kiffin's second season, Davis fires him with cause by holding a lengthy press conference complete with an overhead projector. Commitment to excellence? There is nothing excellent about lecturing the world on how you are right by using a method reserved for high school English teachers. For the record, Kiffin's complaints about Davis's meddling would be the reason why the Raiders owner's last 2 coaching hires, Tom Cable and Hugh Jackson, were just promoted internally from the offensive side of the ball. Neither man was particularly qualified to be an NFL head coach at this point in time. Not that Davis cared all of that much. As long as they minded their own business and let him meddle in the defense, that's all that mattered to him. Jackson has since gone on to confirm that Davis told him during his interview that the future Browns coach would oversee the offense and the defense was Davis's domain. If his involvement in the defensive coaching wasn't bad enough, the Raiders owner was still in total control of personnel decisions, and he had gone full-on Kanye West mode.
You can't tell me nothing.
Obviously, the draft busts from this era take the headlines. Jamarcus Russell, Darius Hayward-Bay. Raiders fans know this list, but I would argue it was all of the whiffs in the middle and late rounds of the draft that truly doomed the franchise. The middle and bottom of those mid-2000s Raiders rosters were a barren wasteland bereft of any sort of talent. With no top-end talent and no roster depth, no meaningful free agent was going to be willing to sign with the Raiders. Davis spent the 2000s doing what he thought it took to win, but never had the self-awareness to realize he didn't understand what football had evolved into. Go routes and hitting the quarterback hard were no longer a viable strategy. Football in the 60s and 70s when Davis was coming up was a much simpler time, and competition for coaching positions and front office roles was far less. There was never any attempt on his part to update what he was doing, or better yet, bring in people who knew more about what football had begun than his outdated tropes like domination and intimidation. Davis may have owned the Raiders, but the team belongs to the fans. This was something he never ever understood. That is because he was a dude who lied his way in the football and stayed there by crook, a liar to his core. By the end though, the biggest lies were the ones Davis kept telling himself, that somehow he had a capable football mind, that somehow he wasn't the problem. Everyone else was at fault, even though he was the common denominator with the Raiders. Al Davis passed away on October 8th, 2011, and the team's mantra became, "Let's win it for Al." The issue was this team wasn't all of that good, and no one had any real idea on what to do because Al Davis had been doing everything. The team won a pair of games after Davis's death, and everyone just started getting way too emotional. The Raiders were 4-2, but starting quarterback Jason Campbell was hurt in that second victory. Somehow, someway, head coach Hugh Jackson convinces Mark Davis to trade for then Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Carson Palmer. Not just trade for, but surrender a first and second round draft pick. Palmer had been benched in Cincinnati and was basically collecting paychecks from the Bengals in quasi-retirement. No one seemed all of that interested in a former number 1 pick despite his demand for a trade. And if Cincy owner Mike Brown was absolutely adamant they'd only trade Palmer for a first and second round draft pick, the Raiders should have laughed in his face. He needed a major reality check. No team was going to bid themselves up for a quarterback with an injury history coming off a 4-12 record. Then again, it seems fairly likely that those running the Raiders did not understand that reality. Hell, Hugh Jackson at the time would call this the greatest trade in football history. 3 months later, he'd be out of a job. Mark Davis took over from his father and in many ways has been the exact opposite of Senior. Al, headstrong, independent, hell-bent on doing what he wanted. Mark is easily influenced and happy to follow the lead of others. In those early years at the helm, you can really see the influence Roger Goodell had on Mark Davis, whispering in his ear things like get a new stadium done, retool a front office, and let's just go ahead and start there. After the 2011 season ends, Davis hires Reggie McKenzie as the team's first general manager in forever and a day. It was a sound move. McKenzie was not only a former Raiders linebacker, but he had spent a significant amount of time in the Green Bay front office learning from Ron Wolf among many others. It was undoubtedly a solid move. Not only did McKenzie have ties to Al Davis and the legacy of the Raiders, but he was also someone who understood the modern NFL. He would go on to tear the team down to the studs in a long overdue rebuild. His stint was far from flawless, but the Raiders had a coherent football operations plan for the first time in decades. Well, until they didn't, but we'll get to that soon enough. On the stadium front, Goodell keeps pushing Davis into this idea of a stadium share with the 49ers. Several times publicly, Goodell went on record to say that he thought it was a great idea for the Raiders and 49ers to both play in Levi Stadium. By the way, not even Mark Davis was that stupid. Davis eventually drifted away from Goodell's orbit after getting boned on the Los Angeles Stadium deal. In a peculiar twist, somehow the man instrumental in screwing him out of that Los Angeles arrangement, Jerry Jones, would be the guy who would gain his ear next. Jones was a crucial proponent of the relocation to Las Vegas, not because Vegas was a good market or the best fit for the Raiders, but because Jerry Jones liked Vegas and wanted to have more reasons to visit. Nothing like spitting on your dad's legacy to help streamline Jerry Jones's vacation plans. On the football side of things, even as Reggie McKenzie was trying to clean up the mess of all messes, Mark Davis was constantly recruiting John Gruden to come coach the team. Oh good, not only are you tarnishing father's legacy, but you're also undermining your own general manager from the moment he was hired. Good work, Mark. Eventually, after the Raiders had some talent and were no longer NFL doormats, all of a sudden, Gruden tells Davis he's ready to come back to coaching. And what do you know, the 6-6 Oakland Raiders would go on a 4-game losing streak to end 2017, giving Davis just enough of an opening to cut bait on then head coach Jack Del Rio. Not that those losses really matter. Everyone in the NFL knew Gruden was coming back to coach the team by the middle of December. It was really the league's worst kept secret. Gruden spends his first season back with the Raiders beefing with McKenzie, giving Davis no choice but to fire the man who built the roster that convinced Gruden to come out of retirement. Ponder that. Gruden then gets his hand choice patsy to replace McKenzie, that of course being TV's Mike Mayock, who was basically there to fetch coffee for the head coach. This, of course, just blows up spectacularly. Gruden ends up being fired midway through 2021, yet the Raiders somehow managed to backdoor their way into the postseason. The entire team stumps for interim coach Rich Bisaccia. What does Davis do? Apparently, it is Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick who held Davis's ear at this moment in time, because that duo convinces the Raiders owner he needs Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. That goes poorly, as just about everyone not named Mark Davis thought it would go. The 1-2 punch of McDaniels and Ziegler is fired midway through their second season in charge, and Antonio Pierce is named interim head coach. He barely goes 500, but Davis, doing his best George Costanza opposite decision routine,
nothing's ever worked out for me with tuna on toast. I want the complete opposite of tuna on toast.
Gives the full-time gig to a man who was excommunicated from college football for threatening his subordinates with their job if they didn't willingly commit violations. In other words, a real class act. Anyway, things go poorly and the Raiders are right back where they started from, square one. These days, Mark Davis continues to seek guidance in all the wrong places. Step right up, Tom Brady. The lifelong San Francisco 49ers fan who played for a team that kept the Raiders out of the Super Bowl was allowed to acquire an ownership stake in the silver in black. What, was Fredo not interested in joining the Raidership group? What's worse, though, is that Davis now appears to be leaning on Brady for advice to help steer the franchise. This is despite the fact being a good player doesn't mean you'll be good at other things football related. Look no further than Brady's color commentary for proof of that. Besides, we all know Brady is with the Raiders to make some money and use Vegas as an excuse to go live that bachelor life. The Raiders aren't benefiting from this partnership in the slightest. The most frustrating, the most, quite frankly, infuriating aspect of Davis selling ownership stakes to people like Brady is the underlying reality. Mark Davis refused to sell ownership interests in the Raiders in order to help fund a new stadium back in Oakland. It was always deemed a non-starter. I'm not doing that. There were multiple groups in Oakland more than happy to help Davis build a new stadium in exchange for an ownership stake in the Raiders. There was the Fortress Group. There was also a group backed by Raiders legend Ronnie Lott. They were there. They were willing to help. They just wanted an ownership stake in return. The younger Davis was steadfast in his view that would not happen, and instead allowed Jerry Jones to relocate the Raiders to Las Vegas because he liked going to Las Vegas. This means players like Ronnie Lott, guys who are Raiders, who understand the culture, who could probably help the franchise moving forward, were boxed out. Apparently, the Raiders owner would rather be used by folks like Tom Brady because hanging out with someone in their mid-40s makes Mark Davis feel young or something? The final nail in the coffin of the Raiders was that relocation to Las Vegas, but not for the reason you think. It had nothing to do with the Raiders leaving Oakland. Now, that was a sad outcome, no doubt, but this was a franchise that always had a panache for making short-sighted decisions. No, the Raiders moved to Las Vegas, cemented Mark Davis's status as nothing more than a lackey to others, a franchise born out of a fierce independent streak, a desire to do whatever the hell they wanted, whenever the hell they wanted. NFL be damned is nothing but a league stooge. The Raiders are no longer a football team these days. They are a brand. Sell some tickets, sell some merch, fill the coffers. Who needs just win, baby, when you can just sell, baby? A commitment to excellence has been replaced by a commitment to fraudulence. Mark Davis has spent his entire life trying to honor his father's legacy. The truth of the matter is he ruined it. If Al were alive today, he'd be embarrassed by what the franchise has become. Al may have been a meddlesome, lying grifter, but that remains infinitely better than just being some patsy for the NFL. The thing about just win, baby, a will to win, the greatness of the Raiders, a commitment to excellence, is that what worked in the 60s and 70s and early 80s when the Raiders were on top, it no longer works today. You're just not replicating it. Chances are you're not going to turn some cast-off quarterback or non-first rounder into a star. The other antics of those days, the rule breaking, the dirty play, that won't fly in modern times either. So be it, things change. However, the one thing Al Davis understood first and foremost was that the Raiders could not win by doing the same thing as everyone else. And right now, today, the Raiders are trying to do the same thing as everyone else. There's no reason why the Raiders of today, these teams now, can't have the same swag and attitude of the past. Being a Raider is about playing on an edge, a swashbuckling, devil-may-care attitude, playing football in a way no team could match even if they tried. It's a franchise that has provided safe harbor for misfits, outcasts, and those overlooked by other NFL teams. It is a franchise where great players go to become legends, men amongst boys, rebels amongst a sea of conformity. For Raider Nation, wins and losses matter. After all, it is the franchise of just win, baby, but being a Raider, that is for life. The autumn wind has long since deserted the Raiders, plunderers and pillagers, beached amongst the cozy confines of a city where people cosplay pirate. It's easy to see how the Raiders lost their way. More worryingly, the current captain doesn't seem all that bothered to find it. Where the Raiders once laughed at foes after they had conquered and won, today, the NFL simply laughs at what those Raiders have become. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to know more about why the NFL's current ownership structure is just a bunch of nonsense, check out the video in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. And to learn what it was like at the last Raiders game in Oakland, which turned out to not be the last Raiders game in Oakland, video lower left-hand side of your screen. Until next time, I am Cheyenne Hollis. This is The Touchback. And as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.
I'm a Raider, Oakland Raider, from the Bay to LA to Los Angeles.